There's a line in the Bible most people read without stopping, and that's exactly why it works. It doesn't warn you. It doesn't slow down. It just sits there, buried in the middle of a passage like it's nothing. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. That's it. No explanation, no context, just a statement. But if you read it like a record instead of a story, everything changes. Because this isn't written like mythology. It's written like someone documenting something they didn't fully understand but knew was real. And the moment you treat it that way, the question becomes unavoidable. What exactly was on the earth? The text doesn't say they arrived. It doesn't say they were created. It says they were there, which means by the time this was written, whatever they were had already become part of the world. Rest in the line that follows is worse. And also afterward. Meaning whatever happened before the flood didn't end with it. Now read the full sequence the way it's actually written. Humanity multiplies. Something else sees them. Something else chooses them. And then something new appears. No resistance recorded. No confusion described. Just progression. Like steps in a process. And if you're paying attention, that process isn't natural. It doesn't match anything else in the text. It reads like an intrusion. Quiet, direct, permanent. And the part that should bother you the most is how little space it takes up. Something enters the world. Something crosses a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. Something changes what humanity is. And it's described in a few lines, like it didn't need to be explained because the people reading it already knew. Which means this wasn't hidden from them. It was normal. Or at least, it had become normal. That's where this starts. Not with giants, not with destruction. With a line that assumes you already understand what should never have existed. And before we go deeper into this record, subscribe to the channel and stay with this all the way through. Because what comes next only gets darker. And most people never hear it explained like this. The text separates two groups with precision. The sons of God saw the daughters of men. That distinction is intentional. It draws a line between human and something else, and then immediately shows that line being crossed. They saw. That word matters, because it suggests observation before action. This wasn't random. It wasn't sudden. It implies duration. They were watching. Long enough to choose, long enough to decide. And once they decided, the wording shifts from passive to direct. They took. No negotiation, no explanation, no reaction from humanity recorded at all. That absence is disturbing, because something like that should cause panic, resistance, confusion. But the text gives none of it, which suggests either the people didn't understand what they were dealing with, or they couldn't resist it. Either way, control was already gone. Now look at what isn't described. There is no physical detail about these beings, no clear image, just behavior. And behavior tells you more than appearance. They observed like something studying. They chose like something with authority. And they acted without consequence. That combination doesn't fit anything human, and it doesn't fit anything natural. It fits something that exists outside the system the rest of the world follows. If you bring in early interpretations outside the main text, these beings are often called watchers. That word alone carries a different kind of weight. Not protectors, not creators. Watchers. Something that stays at a distance until it doesn't. Something that learns before it acts. And once it acts, it doesn't hesitate. So now the structure is clear. Humanity is present. Something else is watching. And then that something decides to enter. The moment that decision is made, the rest of the story is already set in motion. There are boundaries in the structure of the world that are never meant to be crossed. The text doesn't list them. It assumes them. Human and non-human. Physical and something beyond it. That separation is fundamental, and this is the moment it breaks. They took them as wives. That line is often softened in interpretation, but read it without trying to make it comfortable. It's not describing relationship. It's describing action. Direct, unchallenged. And once that happens, the system changes. Because now, whatever those beings are, they're no longer outside the human world. They're inside it, interacting, altering it. And the text moves forward without hesitation, as if the consequences are already understood. There's no pause to explain what this means biologically, spiritually, or physically. It just continues. That tells you something important. The writer either didn't know how to explain it, or didn't think explanation was necessary, which suggests the effect was obvious to anyone who witnessed it. And then the next line removes any remaining ambiguity. There were children. That's where the horror settles in. Because now you're no longer dealing with presence. You're dealing with creation. Something new exists. Something that is neither fully human nor whatever those beings were. And the text doesn't treat it like an anomaly. It treats it like a result. A direct outcome of a process that had already begun. And once something like that exists, the world doesn't return to what it was. It adjusts around it. Permanently? The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. The name appears after the act, not before. That matters, because it means the name is a response, a label given to something that already existed. And the word itself carries weight depending on how it's translated. Giants, fallen ones, both point in the same direction, something outside normal human definition. But the text doesn't focus on their size. That's what modern retellings emphasize, but the original wording doesn't center it. It centers presence, existence, impact. They were there. That's the statement. And then another line follows that people tend to read as neutral. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. But read that carefully. Renown doesn't always mean admired. It means known, remembered, spoken about long after the fact. That can come from fear just as easily as it can from respect. The text doesn't celebrate them. It records them. And recording something like that without explanation suggests it was undeniable, visible, impossible to ignore. These were not hidden beings. They were part of the world in a way that forced recognition. And once something like that becomes part of reality, it changes how everything else is perceived. Because now the definition of human has been altered, permanently. Right after the Nephilim are introduced, the focus of the text changes completely. It stops describing individuals and starts describing the condition of the entire world. The wickedness of man was great on the earth. That's not a gradual decline. That's a state, a condition that has already taken hold, and it goes further. Every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. That's total, not occasional, not situational, constant. Now place that directly after the introduction of the Nephilim. The sequence matters. Because whether the text states it directly or not, the implication is clear. Something entered the world. Something changed what humanity was exposed to. And after that, everything shifted. Behavior changed. Thought patterns changed. The baseline of what was considered normal changed. This isn't just moral decline. It's systemic corruption. The kind that spreads through everything because the structure holding things in place has already been broken. And once that happens, you don't get partial damage. You get total transformation. The world becomes something else entirely. The word used in other translations for this state is corrupt. And corruption doesn't just mean damaged, it means altered at a foundational level. Something that once functioned correctly now operates in a way it was never designed to. And that applies to everything described here. Humanity, behavior, thought, environment, all of it. The text doesn't isolate the problem, it expands it. The entire Earth is affected, which suggests whatever caused this wasn't localized. It wasn't contained. It spread. And if it spread, it wasn't just physical. It was something deeper. Something that affected perception, decision-making, instinct. The kind of change that doesn't reverse on its own. And the presence of the Nephilim sits inside that condition, not separate from it, not unaffected by it, part of it. Which raises a question the text never answers directly. Were they the cause, or were they a symptom of something already in motion? Either answer leads to the same place. The world is no longer functioning the way it was meant to. The Lord saw. That's how the next section begins. Observation again, but this time from a different perspective. Not from within the world, from outside it. And what is seen is not partial damage. It's total failure. The wording is absolute. Everything is affected. Nothing remains untouched. And the response is immediate. There is no attempt to repair, no process of correction, just a decision, which tells you the condition had gone too far to fix. Whatever boundary had been crossed earlier, it wasn't just crossed, it was destroyed. And once something like that is gone, rebuilding becomes impossible. The only option left is removal. I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race. That line is direct, final. It doesn't isolate the Nephilim. It doesn't isolate the Watchers. It includes everything. Humanity, animals, ours, all living things. Which suggests the corruption had spread beyond just human behavior. It had affected the entire system. And when that happens, you don't remove one part, you remove all of it. The scale of that decision is something most people read past too quickly. This isn't judgment in the way it's usually described. This is reset. Complete removal of what exists to make space for something new. And that only happens when what exists can't be salvaged. The flood is often told as a story of survival. But if you read it in sequence with what came before, it reads differently. It reads like containment, like something overwhelming the world to remove what had spread through it. Water doesn't negotiate, it doesn't choose. It covers everything equally. And that's exactly what happens. The world that had been altered, corrupted, changed by something that should never have entered it, is erased, not partially, completely. At least, that's how it's usually understood. But there's still one detail that doesn't fit cleanly into that conclusion. And also afterward. That line doesn't belong if the flood was a complete reset. But it's there. Which means something remained, or something returned. The text doesn't explain it. It doesn't expand on it. It just leaves it there. And that's where the discomfort settles. Because if something like the Nephilim existed once, if something crossed into the human world, altered it, and led to a complete erasure event, and still managed to be referenced afterward, then the flood didn't close the door completely. It only interrupted what had already begun. And if it was interrupted, then the possibility of it happening again was never removed.